everyone. This is Ramita here. I welcome you, our Humans of Cyber. And in today's series, we have a very special guest with us. We have Mr. Abhishek Ramavat, who is, from Tech Agreem. Abhishek is an accomplished business leader with over 2 decades of experience in the global markets across the UK, EMEA, and APAC. He's also a cloud cybersecurity practitioner with over 20 years of hands-on and management experience in implementing, building, and leading solutions that span application, cloud, and network security. Abhishek possesses deep domain and market knowledge in various fields of cybersecurity, including GRC, identity, IoT, and cloud. Throughout his career, Abhishek has held several technology, businesses, and leadership positions in organizations such as HCL Technologies and EY. Beyond his professional achievements, Abhishek is deeply invested in promoting sustainable business practices and supporting the startup ecosystem. His hands-on approach allows to actively contribute to the success of organizations as well as individuals. We welcome you to Humans of Cyber, Abhishek.
Thank you, Ramita. That was a long introduction, by the way, but I'm not that a great person. But glad to have you with Ramita here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, to start off, what are few common challenges or misconceptions that executives or boards typically have when it comes to understanding about cybersecurity risks?
So let me first start with Ramita, how the landscape is changing, right? If you look at some 7-8 years back, cybersecurity was not a boardroom conversation, right? It was very limited to, very limited to the regulated sector, such as financial services, right? Other than that, you could never see the impact of cybersecurity in other organizations, right? So the way things have evolved, and I would also put this with the context of how the executives are struggling to communicate with the board members or executive, right? With the time, cybersecurity is becoming more and more prominent. We saw this starting with the peak in ransomware attacks. Then came COVID, then Ukraine-Russia crisis, and now Israel-Hamas, and the entire geopolitical scenario which has shaped up, right? But the board members or the executives are still struggling in terms of understanding the technicality of cybersecurity. How are they aligned to their strategic priorities and initiative, right? So that's kind of one misconception. We think that cybersecurity is a technical problem, while board and executive do not perceive it in that way, right? Second misconception is about, board believe that, cyber risks are overblown. They can be fully preventive, right? That's not the reality because the world has changed, right? I keep on giving this statement. It is not about if it is going to happen to me, it is about when. So today or later, you will definitely have a cyber incident or cyber breach to be able to manage it, right? Second misconception, which we've been hearing from many of the board and executive conversation is that we have security monitoring process in place. If you remember the old SOC or NOC functions or security operation functions, right? But the executives are not realizing that it has become far more sophisticated, right? The degree of investment that you have, the threat vectors are probably 100x more than investing into what you are trying to invest, right? So that's again a misconception which board and executives have got. In many cases, there is an underestimation of potential financial impact, reputational impact, which a breach can cause, right? We only talk about, if I talk in a very layman perspective, losing out on, say, few servers or few digital assets which are compromised. But we never understand the downstream and upstream impact on potential supply chain. We don't understand the impact, what it costs to your own customer deliveries as well, right? And this is generally very, very unknown within the organization, right? we also see that one of the misconception is, executive not understanding the importance of the resilience capabilities. While cyber is the important one, but resilience is kind of cutting across the business resilience as well, right? So I keep on coining this term of minimum viable organization. If something goes to wrong with you with respect to cyber, what do you need to be able to run your business in a minimum viable way, right? So these are certain misconceptions that we are seeing in the industry when it comes to the communication with the board, and which is also about board not understanding the challenges which they can face with respect to cyber security risk, right? Over to you, Ramita.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad that we spoke about resilience, which is as often a subject which is very important but not so spoken about. So thank you for that insightful answer. Moving on to my next question. So how should a CISO or the
Mhm.
CISO's approach in translating this complex technical cybersecurity jargon into language that's digestible and relevant for the board members who might not have a technical background like me?
Mm. So I think so first of all, I think translating these or demystifying this technical jargons to a board conversation is extremely important. So I've been personally part of many such discussions. We've been the CISO struggle to communicate why, for example, an investment is needed. What is the impact of having a specific cybersecurity breach, right? For that reason, right? So, some of the key takeaways which I can give is to the CISOs and the head of cybersecurity is, can you really attach the cyber risk with respect to business context and impact to an organization, right? That's extremely important. Take a scenario if we are talking. There's often a vulnerability conversation, right? And the executives never understand what does vulnerability mean. But if you are able to tie back to a vulnerability to a potential breach, and what business impact would it have, not in terms of dollars only, but in terms of your own operations, your own, see, most of the large enterprises which have got a multi country spread, if you could bring that contextualization, that is extremely going to help the boards and the CISOs to be able to translate that technical jargons into a business context, right? Second approach, which we've been seeing that is getting more and more prevalent in terms of using a scenario-based approach, right? So there could be many scenarios from a cybersecurity risk perspective. This could be something as small as, in the impact of a zero-day vulnerability, right? Or this could also be something as complex as a geopolitical scenario, right? So those scenarios are something which board and executive would always resonate to, right? So if the security practitioners and the CISOs can create these scenarios while they're communicating to board members, and I'll repeat them again: geopolitical, industry context. Let's take an example. What is really happening in manufacturing industry? What is really happening in supply chain? What is really happening with respect to your own business context, in similar industry, similar domain, is going to have a kind of more impactful conversation, and when you're translating this for board members. Lastly, highlighting the real world consequences, right? Cybersecurity or cyber threats, it's no more about, or it is now less about in terms of, losing your tech capabilities, right? So the real world consequences is more about, impact your bottom line, impact on a top line, the brand, the reputation, the operations, your inability to deliver to your customers. So it has increased multifold, right? So if you can translate those jargons into what it really costs from the real business perspective, is really going to help the executives to be able to talk to the board, to CXOs and so on. Ramita.
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, another very important point that you brought up about
Mm.
translating complex cybersecurity jargons into simplified terms. And yeah, thank you. So moving on to another scenario that I want to ask a question about. So when you discuss about cybersecurity risks, right, with the board, okay, as a CISO, so should the CISO prioritize which risks or vulnerabilities are there to emphasize? especially let's consider the board's focus on a strategic decision making. So where should the emphasis be on?
We should look at it as that, first of all, these vulnerabilities or this should be communicated with respect to what risk these are bringing to the organization. This could be attached to your strategic goals. This could be attached to your business priorities. This should be attached to, your growth plans and so on, right? What we have seen in our experience, to kind of tie it back, there's it's very important that you kind of set up something more like which is more of an objective based program, something like using risk quantification concepts, right? So we are seeing the adoption of FAIR methodology, sorry, which was earlier very prevalent in the financial services sector, is also becoming more prevalent in the non-FS sector as well. There are many examples, Ramita, from the breaches which have happened recently. In terms of looking at one is the actual one is the perceived cost of the breach, and then is the actual cost of the breach, which is a combination of multiple factors, right? I think that's where CISOs can help prioritize which vulnerabilities or which kind of potential exposures to focus on, right? The second key area that we are seeing is there's a lot of conversation happening in terms of minimum viable organization, right? And minimum viable organization can be broken down into multiple phases. If, God forbid, if something happens to the organization, a vulnerability getting compromised, and a potential breach happening, what do you really need to be operational, right? And you cannot be operational on day one, right? It would take you weeks and weeks to be 100% operational if the impact of the breach is of a significant nature, right? Think it on a way that when you are communicating or when you're prioritizing these vulnerabilities, if you're able to understand the impact on your MVO, which is the minimum viable organization, this should help you prioritize and really help you attach to a decision making within the board. This is also with an experience, Ramita, which I'm sharing. It's in many cases there's always a perception within the board, if something goes wrong, we will be able to recover within a day or two, right? In many cases, the cyber breaches happening through these vulnerabilities have taken months to recover. When I say months, think it from what I said as an MVO1 to MVO4, right? Multiple phases of recovery of the organization, right? So if you're attaching your conversation back to the MVOs, it will help you in terms of getting that prioritization with the boards and executives, right? So to summarize, I think 3 areas. Think of objective-based program, bring concepts around risk quantification. Risk quantification would also help you understand, what are your existing capabilities, what you can really mitigate, and what insurances you need. Also think these vulnerabilities in a way of MVO, which is minimum viable organization, and try to stitch it in a way that what do you need to sustain your phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. And that's where if you communicate or if you kind of have those conversations with boards, it will really tie it back to their strategic decision thinking, Ramita.
Yeah, that's so true. Being being a part of a cybersecurity OEM, I think we have also, during the COVID especially, we have also come across a lot of similar incidents and scenarios. And yes, you're right that it's not that not that easy to get back. No.
That is correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So with this, I will move on to my 4th question. So if you could share some effective communication strategies or frameworks that have worked well in conveying cybersecurity risks to your board with your experience, with your life experience.
Yeah, very good question, Ramita. Ramita, first of all, I think I would want to start answer to this question is in a way that most of the executives now understand cyber risk, right? So this is getting on top of board agenda, right? Whether you look at the SMB segment or the enterprise segment, all of them are really talking about cybersecurity risk, right? In my experience, I have not seen a single board meeting where security is not being spoken about, right? And especially in Europe, we are sitting on the hotbed of the geopolitical conflict, unfortunately, that we have. It is the topic of conversation in every single executive or board meeting, right? Secondly, I think the CISOs and security practitioners should be prepared to communicate the cyber risk in a non-techie way, right? Unfortunately, generally what you would see, the board members or the board executives, they come from a diverse background, right? They would be kind of having sustainability, having the product background, they'll be having more of a manufacturing background. I think these days, with the way the structures are being formed, there's at least some tech representation coming on board as well, which is a good thing. But try to stay away from conversations around vulnerabilities, monitoring and logging. It is not helping. So it is very important that you stay away from very tactical conversations to be able to stitch it back to more strategic conversation, which they can resonate with, right? I covered on a scenario-based reporting or scenario-based communication in one of your previous question, Ramita. In more and more experience, what I'm seeing that it is easy for them to resonate and then to act on if you're bringing scenarios like supply chain impact, right? Production downtime, brand and reputation impact. The good thing is the ransomware is being understood quite well, the way it has exploded globally, right? And no country is being spared, more or less. The other area which has been working is kind of employ some storytelling exercises, right, around cyber risk, which makes it more tangible, which makes it more compelling for the boards and executives to be able to consume. One other experience which I think which I would want to share, generally, traditionally we've been doing, say, drills, right? We've been personally working on certain initiatives around wargaming, resilience capabilities, which is prepping board that if an actual thing happens, how prepared are they, right? So this could be, in event of a cyber breach, how you're handling media, for example, how you're defining, what bare minimum do you need to kind of run your production, for example, right? How would you respond to regulators? Are you really prepared for that or not, right? So if you use these strategies in terms of having a communication toward board members, it's really going to help you in terms of conveying the importance of cybersecurity risk to the board executives. Ramita.
Thank you so much. With this, I would also like to ask you, how should a CISO effectively communicate the resource, the needs, the budget allocations necessary to mitigate identified risks without overwhelming the board with technical details?
Yeah, indeed, a good question, Ramita. Ramita, the way I see it, first of all, more and more firms are realizing that cybersecurity is one of the core competency, right? Gone are the days when we used to think cybersecurity as an outsourced function, right? We are seeing a trend in the global market where
or rather we would see cybersecurity as a antivirus and firewall kind of a scenario.
Yeah, I think gone are those days, right? So now this is becoming a core competency to a business, right? So just imagine if something goes wrong, Ramita, it is really impacting for the ability of an organization to run, right? So that's one change which has happened. I just wanted to kind of bring that context. We have seen it very effective when you are creating a target operating model, where you're linking it back to the cybersecurity, wherein what competency do you need, right? It's a broad term, if you look at cybersecurity. Now, then it can be broken down into more tech, more threat, more intelligence capabilities, your response capabilities, your supply chain security, how do you run your critical operations, how do you manage your production sites, and everything has got a cybersecurity attached to it, right? So I think of an operating model which the board and executives can understand for you to give your budget and your resource allocation. Another very effective lever which I've seen or I've experienced in my conversation is attaching it to the obligations from a compliance, right? So one is the risk side of it, and second is also the compliance side of it. And you really can't do business if you do certain hygiene parameters, right? In Europe, we are seeing the NIS2 has become one of the next-gen thinking which European Union Parliament has done. We see AI Act coming into effect quite soon. We are seeing the Data Privacy Act. It was GDPR, California Consumer Privacy Act. The Indian Data Protection Act, right? So they're all now become a reality. Especially on the product side, and which is also covering the digital products which are using, say, IoT enabled infrastructure. There's a new act which is Cyber Resilience Act. So if you bring those articulations in your board conversation, they will understand the importance of it, and they will be bound to spend that budget which is needed for you to sustain in the business, right? Another thing which is also, again, I would say a lever that you can use, while you are communicating it, is outlining the consequence of underinvestment, right? What is the consequence if something goes wrong? I'm using the same MVO kind of conversation quite often, right? This is where the executives will be able to relate it to their own strategies, relate it to their own ways of working, and the growth ambitions that they have as an organization, Ramita.
Thank you so much. So moving on to the last question. Rather, I want to know that if you can suggest some tips and tricks to keep the board engaged, to our audience, it would be great.
Yeah, indeed. Again, I really like this question. I keep on talking about this quite often. See, one thing which, if I have to kind of give some tips and trips from my own experience, so one is communicating. It is not about how, it is about when is it going to happen to you, right? So there was a time where we were talking about the detect and prevent capabilities. It is also about the response capabilities, right? And I kind of stated this in the early part of the session as well, Ramita. The pace at which the threat vectors are working, it is phenomenal, right? That should be constantly communicated to boards and executives. This will bring the board executive more closer to the real cyber world, right? They at times they're not even aware of what is happening in the deep and dark web, right? This is over and above imagination and what most of us would have seen in our past experiences, right? Second thing which I would strongly advise CISOs and head of cybersecurity is don't restrict cybersecurity as to an IT conversation. This is kind of make it too narrow. The things have gone beyond IT. While it is still arising, most of them are still arising from the digital footprint, but it is getting connected to your factories, to your supply chain, and so on. This has to be closely tied back to the business of the organization. Think of recent breach scenarios, right? The critical infrastructure in many countries were compromised. The factory sites were compromised. Quite recently, there were incidents in the European market where the healthcare infrastructure was compromised, right? So if we include that as part of our constant dialogue and engagement with the board, it is really going to help the CISOs and cyber executives. I think no conversation these days is left without AI, right? And the way we are seeing in the market, and the one of the tip which I want to give to the CISOs and the cyber practitioners, the way the AI is disrupting cybersecurity landscape is beyond expectation, right? And it's not just on the attacker side; it is also on the organization side. Think it in a way, if you are not embracing AI in your conversation or analytics in your conversation with boards and the executive members, the attackers are doing at a much faster pace, right? So it is bound to happen if you don't embrace that, right? So it is going to give you a degree of confidence to be able to recover in a stipulated time. So these are certain tips and tricks. I think lastly, what I said is, think of your operating model. You really can't operate in today's complex world taking cyber as a back-end function, right? It has to be integral part of your business. It has to be integral part of your day-to-day conversation, and think it in a way that it is touching across every nook and corner. I was talking to one of the manufacturing organization quite recently. They are making smart trucks, right? So the IoT devices or the smart trucks which are being built, and the way they're communicating, they are potential for any cyber breach or potential cyber breach which can happen, right? Think it from that perspective. With this, I think you should be able to articulate the challenges to the board from a cybersecurity standpoint. Ramita, over to you back.
Yeah, thank you so much, Abhishek. I think, we had a lovely conversation. I would say a very simplified conversation from a CISO, which is easily, digestible to a non-techie like me. So thank you so much for your time. And we are so glad that we had you here today.
Thank you, Ramita, and pleasure to be with you. Looking forward to more collaboration in future.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.